Thank you. The word courage comes from the Latin cor, C-O-R, which means heart. According to poet Mark Nepo, the original use of the word courage meant to stand by one's core, C-O-R-E, or core. A, quote, striking concept that reinforces the belief found in almost all traditions that living from the center is what enables us to face whatever life has to offer, end quote. Poet David White says that when we hear the word courage, we jump to outward expression, to a response to some besieging circumstance. Courage is a show of force. Once engaged in, we are proud of our effort, maybe the recipients of accolades for a time to come, depending on the level of courage and in the face of what. But he goes back to the etymology as well, tying it to the heart. Courage is about putting our heart into our living, about a depth of feeling within our bodies, but not that alone. It is about also seeding it in the world, living into those things we find we care deeply about, to stay close to the way we are made, and to share that with other persons, with a future full of possibility, some unknown that calls to us. The French philosopher Camus invites us to live to the point of tears, an invitation into belonging, into relationship with what we feel as we navigate the day-to-day. Over time, the inner and the outer aligned. It requires a robust vulnerability, according to White, that only in hindsight presents itself as courage. Douglas Taylor, in our reading this morning, talks about vulnerability born of courage as opposed to fear, a strength that arises from an open stance, receptive and sharing. It is a willingness to face the risks, all the questions that pop up in our minds, the what-ifs we process in rapid succession, to sit with them, hearts wide and ready to receive. Not an outward act, but an inward melding of what we know of ourselves and what we encounter. It is a choice, he says. We can choose to react, or we can wait. The latter, the more courageous move. Softness is not weakness, writes Bo Taplin. It takes courage to stay delicate in a world so cruel. Famed author, professor, and researcher Brené Brown speaks frequently on the topic of vulnerability. And she says that she has not found a single example of courage, be it moral, spiritual, relational, or undertaken in a leadership role, that was not born entirely of vulnerability. The word courage used to mean speaking one's mind by disclosing the contents of one's heart. Today, we typically associate courage with heroic and brave deeds. But for Brown, this definition fails to recognize the inner strength and level of commitment required for us to actually speak honestly and openly about who we are and about our experiences be they good or bad, the fortitude to let it all spill out. All of these great thinkers are telling us to do something that is counterintuitive, countercultural even. How many times in a decision-making process about an unknown future do we insist on not letting our emotions get in the way? In our culture, we count on reason as more valuable than emotion. To resist the initial fight, flee, or freeze impulse when faced with an event or a need or a series of circumstances, anything that rubs up against our personal status quo. Our world presents us daily with those rubs. It only takes one round of the news cycle to come across things that cut away at the fabric of our belief systems. And who of us only attends to one cycle? More likely it is several passes. We become frozen in time, filled with disbelief. We want to lash out, to bring whatever power we hold to bear on the situation. Or we find we simply cannot bear it, and we go into hiding. The courageous thing, if I am understanding all of this correctly, is to allow ourselves to feel all of the associated feelings, to sit with them as they wash over us. They have their cycles too, our emotions. To be vulnerable, to let our hearts be filled, and to let what resides at our core meet what comes, swirling about within us, breathing through it, patient until it settles. This takes immense courage, this ability to be present to whatever is happening before we step into action, so that our response is informed by our heart, by that which is most meaningful to us. We have been faced here at the meeting house with a set of issues that could have had us reacting. Things like membership and finances and aging and building worries. Faced with these things, we could find ourselves burying our heads in the sand. We could give it all up and head off for easier climbs. We could jump to conclusions and make hasty decisions. We could act out of a place of fear. But we haven't. We have done the courageous thing here. Facing the issues thoughtfully, not panicked about it. Engaging with one another in conversations that invite the exploration of our hearts and the pouring out of our heart's contents, present to each other. Pulling all of that together, we come to a time where we can allow it to penetrate our deepest selves. Again, not running or hiding or fighting what we find, but a wholehearted approach to the creative imaginings that have been stirred in our midst. Vulnerable, courageous. I'd like us to take a little time together to think about our lives, each of us as persons, and maybe all of us as a people, but to search our own hearts and uncover what has recently asked us to be vulnerable and to employ this deep courage. Each of us unique beings, even as much as we share our commonalities here, will find our own sources of angst or shock or hurt that rub up against our hearts. I want to invite you to share, if you will, one of those things you discover, to speak it into our sacred space. We will light a candle to represent that vulnerability and the courage it takes to explore and to reveal what is there. So let's take a few moments to breathe and to focus and see what arises for us. What shows up for you as having asked you to take heart lately? You can raise your hand when you're ready, and Sue will bring you the microphone, and we will look for folks on Zoom as well. Joan? Sue will bring you the microphone.
I am so frustrated that I cannot do what is required to move around the damn documents for the worships committee. And I really need, I think I'm probably not the only one, I need a young person who can take the material I have and the information I have about the person who's going to speak and put it on that stupid form.
Thank you, Joan. That took courage. And I appreciate your vulnerability. And yes, we need people with different levels of skill to work together with, right? Yeah.
So I'm the healthcare proxy for my 101-year-old mom. And some days are great and some days are a little bit of a challenge. What I'm finding that takes courage is there's no rehearsal for making decisions. And you want to make the right decisions, and you try not to second guess too much, but you really want to do what's best for the person that you love so dearly. I'm finding that the seminar here, I'll put a little promotional plug for the Wednesday meetings because they're really instrumental. I can't say enough about them and encourage everybody to go. But needless to say, I think facing one's mortality and taking care of people, making decisions for their future is a challenge, and it takes some courage.
It certainly does. Thank you.
Hi, it's Jenny. Do I need to stand up?
Go ahead, whatever you want.
So standing up in front of a group takes courage for me.
Yeah.
And a year or so ago when I started singing in the choir, that took courage to start singing in the choir. And thankfully Frank was kind, and the other singers were kind when I was pitchy or sharp or sang when I shouldn't sing. Well, some people think that I am not scared because I often talk, and I did like singing that song today, but that took a lot of courage, and I'm not saying that because I want compliments. I don't. I just want to go for a walk after church. But so for me, like speaking or not speaking is often a courage thing. Like not speaking takes a lot of courage for me sometimes because I'll talk instead of being quiet. And also knowing when to stop.
Thank you, Jenny.
Hi, I'm Pavia. I've noticed that the people who have taken over the leadership of the meetings each morning have shared with me that they're a little nervous about doing it, and I think it's fantastic that they've stepped up to do that. And every one of them has done a wonderful job.
Mhm.
So I'm grateful, and we admire the courage to do that.
We've made ourselves vulnerable. There's a level of trust here, and we work together.
Well, I have a husband with Parkinson's, and it's getting worse. And I'm trying to get the courage to face the decisions that I'll have to make in the future. And I think I should start coming to these Wednesday meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, he had a sudden really bad day, and I read that sometimes that happens, and sometimes they don't come back from it. And he seems to have come back from it. But he's definitely deteriorating, and it's scary.
Mm-hmm.
And watching your husband disappear in front of you is scary.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get the courage to deal with some of the decisions I'll have to make.
Thank you. Are there folks on Zoom who would like to share? Robin can check. Kathy? Kathy, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
I think did I do it?
You did.
First of all, I'd like to say hello to my husband.
Aw.
Hi, John. You sounded great. So we don't talk about this very often, I guess, but John and I have a wonderful son who's living with us right now. And he is doing some wonderful work, but he has over the past few years faced a number of concerning health issues. And we don't have all the answers yet. And sometimes it just takes a lot of courage because we're not sure we're always doing the right thing or approaching things the right way. But I found that, Tracy, your sermon today really helped me think about things in a different way. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Being a parent and a spouse, for that matter, is a really vulnerable place. But out of that vulnerability, we develop courage. Yeah. Dana?
Hi, I'm glad to see everyone and be here, and what a beautiful subject matter for a service. Thank you for it. I have a friend with a stroke, and I find every time I'm about to step into his room or call him on the phone, I step over fear. But then it's glorious to be with him and just that he's still with us, but that's difficult and painful. And then I also was just thinking of my aunt who once I told her I wanted to have a dog, and she said, well, the problem with dogs is they die. I guess anytime we really have if we ever want to love anyone or thing or place, it requires courage to know that it's temporary. But I just think it's worth it, and I'm learning that as I get older. I was telling Naomi I'm thinking more and more of really committing to being in the Cape more often, because I don't like being spread so wide. But it's, when you're dependent on fewer people, you're dependent, and it's vulnerable. But I think it'll also be more fulfilling, and I'll be able to be of more service. Anyway, I love our church. Thanks.
Thank you, Dana. To make ourselves vulnerable for those we love. Joan? Wait a minute.
I'm feeling very vulnerable.
That's good.
My husband and I had a discussion yesterday about death and dying. Why not? And I have a very, very good friend whose mother, they lived in Illinois. She was a farmer's wife, 8 kids, 2 of whom became doctors, a rotten husband, and a really, really interesting, smart woman. And when she was in her 90s and she was suffering from various, ills and illnesses, she had kidney failure. And she said to her children around her bedside, she said, this is my point, you have to die of something. It might as well be this, and so I don't want dialysis. And I've thought about that a lot because I think being able to make that decision must be really, it would be very important to me if I could get myself to the point where I could do that.
Mm-hmm. To be vulnerable to the cycles of life and to find courage in that. Are there others? Eric, go ahead.
Okay, I think I unmuted. First of all, thank you to all of you for holding Greg and I up throughout this journey. Courage. I never thought of courage in the face, really, of the disease. But, Greg has a chronic illness, and I used to say to myself how courageous he was in facing this chronic disease. And now I have a chronic disease, and it's interesting that you don't really think of it as courageous. It's just what you have to do in order to survive. And so, I think it was courageous, for instance, in the 80s, when all of our friends were dying from AIDS, to actually see them and care for them and be courageous in the face of something no one knew what was going to happen. Like if you could just get it from breathing, or if you got it in the 70s before and you were going to die, you just kept going on. And so I kind of think that the courage to just go on, like you talk about on the Wednesday thing, we've been through so much. We have planned your entire everything. I mean, you've made death decisions, you've made life decisions, you have all of these decisions in a book now. And just the other day, I said to Greg about the Wednesday meeting, I said, I think I spent enough time thinking about dying already that I would rather not attend anymore. Any more things about planning for dying. I just feel like it's courageous just to go day to day and try to live and do what's put in front of you that will keep you living and thriving, and courageous to go into old age and just hope you can survive, I guess. That's all. I mean, it just takes courage every day.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Such vulnerability and courage. My colleague Erica Hewitt says that to encourage means to hearten, to impart strength and confidence, and that this is our work as a religious community, to encourage one another, to be bold in engaging the world around us, as well as what scares us internally, to give one another the confidence and heart to live as fully as possible. When we open our hearts to one another like we have here this morning, like we have in our sharing circles recently, like many of you do in your small groups, and like we will have the opportunity to do in a bit, we are doing the courageous and vulnerable work of community making. Gregory Pelly writes that, quote, "We need only to be aware, to be present to what is happening around us. We need only to take a risk, to speak out even when it is hard, even when our voice shakes," end quote. After that, we can set about doing something, whatever work is required of us. But this is where the miracles begin, when we engage from our heart center, opening, receiving, stirring, and settling. Our service today is an invitation to take heart, to open wide the doors of our being, to experience all of what comes our way, and grounded in our core, to let vulnerability be the place from where our courage rises up. As we face our future here on the hill, heart to heart, may we be blessed and blessing both. So may it be, and amen.